Why don't we all strap bombs to our chests and ride our bikes to the next G7 picnic? Seems easier with every clock.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, hosted by two teachers who break down a different propaganda song each episode. Today we're talking about Resisting Tyrannical Government, track 9 from the second full-length LP, Less Talk, More Rock. That album was released on April 23rd, 1996 by Fat Records.
Is this our first Less Talk, More Rock song?
It is.
Awesome. Well, this is I'm really pumped. So some things that jump out at me about this record is that this is John K. Sampson of the Weaker Than's last album on bass. And did you listen to the episode where Chris told the story about when he and John both realized they couldn't be in the band together?
Yeah, it's super funny.
What did you think about that story? That was amazing.
Yeah, I thought it was just really, it really speaks volumes to the reality that each member came to terms with, knowing that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. And to me, Chris, I read an interview with Chris recently where he said something along the lines of this record, Let's Talk More Rock, is as far as we could take it with this relationship in this lineup. So it really just cracked me up. But this record, how did you feel about the fact that this record's only like 25 minutes long?
It's short. Yeah, but I think it's effective in that I don't know if a 40-minute version of Less Talk would work, but I think 25 minutes works for this album.
Yeah. And, whenever Potemkin City Limits came out, it was like 40 plus minutes. And
Right.
Comparing like the length of Potemkin to the length of Less Talk, More Rock, it's like really pretty incredible. But so this record was produced by Ryan Green, and the sound on this record is, pretty close to what I envision whenever I think of like a mid-90s Ryan Green punk rock record. So the band refers to this album as one of the few conscious decisions they ever made. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so if How to Clean Everything was a provocative album, stirring things up in the punk scene during the explosion, Let's Talk More Rock was meant to be antagonistic. By dint of an incredibly successful debut release during the early 90s punk explosion, the band accidentally attracted a crowd their music and message challenged, macho jocks, Nazis, homophobes,
Blah.
who were more interested, in starting fights at the shows rather than like picking up a book from their resource table that they would tour with on political consciousness or animal rights or activism. So Let's Talk More Rock finds the band openly addressing things like animal rights and gender and sexuality, white supremacy, capitalism, all while openly mocking the listeners with the fingers in their ears regarding the message, who just wanted to be there to party. So, emblazoned on the front where it says animal friendly, gay positive, pro-feminist, and anti-fascist, the idea was to get those people to stop listening to the band. And in a way, they kind of torpedo their own career, since How to Clean Everything was so popular. It didn't really seem like anything after this was nearly as successful as that first record. But Chris Hanna said, quote, "I think everybody who liked Pennywise got off the wagon really early."
Which isn't true.
A different crowd.
It's not true, because I like Pennywise too. So I was into both.
Gotcha. So how about our guest this week? Since this is not an album I heard, so I didn't hear this album when it first came out. Who are we going to talk to?
So we are going to talk to my pal, Josh. Josh and I have been friends for a long time, and I met him when he was playing bass and singing in a band in St. Louis called Form Follows Failure. And members of that band Josh went on to play in Break the Silence in Chicago with Dan Precision. And Jevin went on to play drums for Much the Same. And then their other guitar player, Matt, went on to play guitar briefly for Near Miss out of Austin, Texas. So Josh is my old pal, and we've hung out for years. And he has been listening to Propaganda since the mid 90s. And so we're going to talk to my friend Josh Segal. Josh Segal, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Pleasure to be on.
I'm delighted to have you here, sir. As one of my oldest friends in the world, it's a real pleasure to have a longtime friend of mine on this show to do this and to hang out and to talk about one of our mutual favorite bands. But you're also a musician, and we're on a show talking about music. Can you spend a couple of minutes and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as a musician over the years?
Sure. So I don't play music professionally these days. I had a little bit of time playing in minimally successful punk rock bands who toured back in the early 2000s. I played in a band called Form Follows Failure in St. Louis, played in a band from Chicago called Break the Silence, playing bass. These days I play music to my son Elijah, but not really putting much out into the world. But I grew up in Huntington Beach, California in the 90s. Spent time in St. Louis, went to Washington University for college, lived in Chicago when I played in Break the Silence. I moved to upstate New York to be I started medical school in upstate New York, and now I live in Southern California, where I'm practicing as a surgical pathologist at a private practice group in Thousand Oaks. And so music flows in and out of my life. Today I'm looking at slides under the microscope, and I have my headphones on, and I'm listening to music as I go. So it continues to sort of drive me in my every move.
Nice. Yeah. And I can see a wide range of musical instruments within reach just behind you. I see a nice little Ampeg cab back there, some acoustics. I got a bass hanging up there. I think I see a ukulele behind you and possibly a drum set as well, and also a piano. So you're surrounded by music even in your home office.
And a microscope that used to belong to my dad. So yeah, it's there's a variety of tools in my shed up here.
Nice, nice. Okay, so since this is a podcast specifically about the band Propaganda, can you tell us a little bit how you discovered the band and when you came across them?
So I grew up listening to a lot of Nirvana. That's kind of where I got my start in music. Learned how to play guitar listening to their songs. When I got to middle school, it was kind of in the midst of like the Fat Records, skate punk explosion. Green Day had just become very successful. The Offspring. When I was a freshman in high school, I think it was probably 1996, somewhere around then. I met a guy named Nick James who sang. He was a front man. He played bass guitar, and on his bass guitar, there was a Propaganda sticker that he had very meticulously cut out. I think it's the Propaganda logo from the How to Clean Everything album.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just admired that sticker. I didn't know much about the band, but then, that Survival of the Fattest compilation came out with all of these great songs, including Nation States. But, the NoFX cover of Vincent was on there. Justified Black Eye by No Use for a Name, just lots of great songs. So the Propaganda song, obviously, on there is one that, many people think of as being like one of the greatest songs of theirs. And so that song in particular sort of introduced me to that band. A buddy of mine named Jaron Louder had the Let's Talk More Rock CD, and at that time he was letting me borrow CD after CD. Yeah. And so that was one of the ones that ended up in my room at home. I don't think I ever gave it back to him, to be honest. I know, Greg, you had a story about that, but yeah, that was how I first came to know anything about them. But in all honesty, man, I didn't really know a whole lot about them. I just knew that they were talking about things that were difficult for me to wrap my head around. But sonically, musically, it was very easy to, for someone like me to kind of get sort of caught up in it, because it was fast and energetic and, politically charged lyrics. And so, that was kind of the scene that I came to find them.
So we're going to get into a specific song from Let's Talk More Rock in a few minutes, but I'm curious if you have like a ranking system of how you rate the discography of the band. Like, do you have like favorite eras of the band, specific specific records that really like jump out at you as like to the total package, so to say?
Honestly, I don't have a ranking system. I continue, I've listened to them probably ever since '96, and um, Victory Lap, of course, is the latest release that I'm aware of, and I've sort of listened to everything in between. I love Let's Talk More Rock. It's probably my favorite, and a lot of that has to do with just the time in my life where I was first exposed to that music. And then probably after that, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, again, because I was just a freshman or sophomore in college around the time of 9/11. And, the band was on tour during that time. And, I was just very inspired by that album in particular. The next crop of albums that came out, I think I've always sought out the music and would try and learn lyrics to songs here and there, but I think, to be fully honest about it, it's not something that I listen to as frequently as I do when I go back and listen to like Let's Talk More Rock or Today's Empires. I mean, that's just the God's honest truth. It's nothing against the songs, like the musicality is amazing and spot on, and obviously the message is still as powerful as it was back then in the 90s, but for me, I guess music just has there's a little bit of a tie-in to the history.
Nice. Well, and as a former musician, touring musician, recording musician, et cetera, who's been involved in this scene off and on for many years, I'm curious if you have any like cool propaganda stories of like, maybe seeing them live and something that happened that really stands out to you, or possibly like something else where like you were involved with a live experience involving propaganda in some way.
Regretfully, I don't have any like stories from being on tour, and like I don't, to my knowledge, I was never playing on a bill where propaganda was on a different stage or anything like that. Probably the closest I ever did come was when Form Follows Failure was slotted to open for propaganda at the Creepy Crawl, but as you know, the date was in, I think, early September 2001, and that show got canceled. And I really remember sort of hovering over my buddy Jevon's computer, just sort of trying to see if we could find any information on the internet as to what was happening. And I just sort of remember these discussions about, oh no, the band once they got to the border, they decided to turn around and head back, and just not get involved with what was going on in the States at that time. It's not a cool story, but it does kind of take me back to a time in this country that was just very chaotic and uncertain, and propaganda was sort of in the midst of all of it. Just in respect to what I was doing at that time in my life, I was in college and a musician and very interested in trying to play out. And so that was probably one of the earliest shows where we actually had the potential to play with a big band, and it never happened. It never happened, but we were so excited for the prospect of opening for them. But that's probably my coolest propaganda. I mean, it's not a very cool story, but it's the closest to that kind of experience.
Well, and that would have been so funny, too, because I actually had a ticket for that show, and I was so excited to see propaganda. It was the Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes tour, and I had not seen Form Follows Failure yet, but we all became friends over the course of time through another mutual friend who was in the band. And so that would have been the first time that I ever saw you guys, which, is kind of funny to think about. Now that I'm sitting here talking to you, and we've been friends for like 15, 16 years, and we're sitting here talking about this near miss live experience on a propaganda podcast. So life is very strange sometimes, don't you think?
Yeah. Definitely.
So when I reached out to you about this project, I asked you about some of your all-time favorite propaganda songs, and the first track that you mentioned was Resisting Tyrannical Government, which is the song that this episode specifically is about. What is it about this song that jumps out at you, like big picture wise? We'll talk about lyrics and music and vocals and stuff in a minute, but what is it like big picture about this song that kind of draws you in?
Um, big picture. That's hard to nail down in a sentence. But I think for me, it's just when you asked me, I didn't hesitate a beat. Probably, I already knew like off the top of my head. That's definitely this song. It's super fast. It's really energetic. Um, the guitar is just a very simple chord progression, but Chris plays these really intricate melodies very high up on the neck. Um, that as a guitarist, for someone like me, I feel like I've been spending years trying to listen closely and hear what he's doing so I can recreate it and mimic it on my guitar. I never seem to be able to pull it off. He just has such a unique voicing on the guitar. So, big picture, it's just there's so much that this song says lyrically that was relevant. I guess back when I was in high school, I think I was a little bit too young and naive to really understand what they were singing about. But going back through the song and listening to it today and thinking about all the things that are happening in the world right now, it's, I guess the big picture for me is that, this is a song for people, for all different kinds of people, but for people like me who are very lucky and who are very privileged, we have an opportunity to use music or use our voice to speak out, to bring awareness to certain things. And it's sort of our duty and our obligation to do so.
Mm.
And we have to find ways to spread the word about certain things. And I, for one, am not an advocate for violence, which this song touches on. But I definitely have always wanted to be some sort of effect for change. Being a voice or for for bringing good into the world. Something like that. And so this song, I think, really tries to sort of send that message.
Mm. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about music, and then we'll come back to lyrics in a little bit. Because you play many different instruments, and I'm curious if you have any insights. You started to mention a little bit about the way that Chris has a very delicate way of playing this song. I'm curious if you can say a little more about any of the musicianship on this song, such as like the vocal melody or the drumming or the very distinct bass or the guitars and anything else that comes up as regarding musicianship, because we love having people who are good at playing music on this show, because Keith and I aren't necessarily musicians. So we like hearing a little bit more about the musical aspect of some of the things that non-musicians might overlook.
Well, I can't tell you too much about theory or time signatures, or I can't break it down in that way. But like, if you say you're somebody who can play guitar relatively well, your A chords, your G, your D, and your E. This is a song that can very easily be sort of distilled down into just strumming on an acoustic guitar, at home at a campfire, and singing with friends. It's kind of like, it's kind of a folksy kind of song if you just put it down into those terms. If you want to sit down at a piano and play and sing with your friends, you could do it that way, and it works really well. But what Chris does is he's not just playing the power chords. He's not moving from an A to a G to a D, and on using power chords. Power chords is probably one of the first things that somebody learns when they're playing guitar. It gives them the opportunity to play just about any song that's ever been created, doing something relatively easy after practicing for a few days. But anyway, a lot of punk is based around power chords, but Propagandhi, they sort of take it to this next level, and they do these more intricate chords and phrasing where they keep that sort of root A note, but he plays it in such a fashion that he's bringing out all these different elements into the guitar, so it has much more of a open and beautiful, kind of very intricate sound. So like the guitar, for those of you who like this song but haven't listened too closely to it, like the guitar is really awesome. And for anyone who likes playing guitar, this would be a great song to learn, because I think you would get better if you learn how to play it, because you would sort of try and use his technique to apply it to different things. So that, that's all I can say about the guitar right now. The solo is especially awesome, and it's kind of similar. He's sort of like strumming these chords and working it into a solo instead of like noodling and showing off.
Yeah. You know, when I was watching a live video of Propaganda playing this song live in 1996 in Kansas City, and it was such an interesting clip because I noticed that Chris's hand placement was way up on the neck, but he
Yeah.
also does these very little delicate movements where he's just shifting his pinky around a little bit here and there, and it's just so artful and it's just so delicate looking. It's not like you would think of when you think of like a raging punk banger where everybody's like dun 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 dun, or they're just shredding those power chords like you were mentioned. It's just like it's like just very delicate, and it's almost like he's like almost hardly even playing at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't overplay.
A lot of stretching chords. If you try and learn from just watching his fingers, you'll go crazy because it's hard to recapitulate unless I think you have a really good ear, which some people do, or you have the tablature, and I'm sure it's on there on the on the internet. But
Yeah, I found a tablature write up where it was all written in power chords as well, and then so I also looked at a couple other live versions, and there's a Mikey Erg live video where he's playing it like a acoustic at the Rock Room, I think, in Chicago, which is run by the former drummer from Alkaline Trio. It's a good video, but he's just hitting those power chords like it's a campfire song, you know?
Yeah, it can be played in so many different ways, and that's another reason that it's such a great song, because I think it lends itself to so many different kinds of experiences or environments for playing and listening to that song.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the rhythm section within this song, which is played by John K. Sampson and Jordan?
Yeah. The bass is awesome. It's got this really kind of like metallic sheen on the bass. It's a very kind of grindy, reminds me a lot of Fat Mike's bass tone, which so I wonder if he had something to do with that and just helping them with recording of the album, or if that just really was John's sort of unique sound. I'm not too familiar with the Weaker Than's bass tone, but yeah, for bass enthusiasts, John does a lot of really cool phrasing on the bass. Again, he's not just playing the root notes going from an A to a G to a D. He's kind of providing harmonies that really blend nicely with the vocal melody. I think it's as someone who has played bass in bands, it's really easy to just sort of watch what the guitarist is doing and mimic that. And so you're on key and you're on beat, and no one's going to look at you like you're messing up. but the really good bass player is going to sort of take it in his or her own direction and add to it and make the song bigger. And I think John does a really good job of doing that in this song.
Nice.
The drums, George is like one of the best drummers, and this song has a very swinging feel to it, and it's obviously it's very fast paced and vibrant and loud, and it's got these good dynamics. There's a lot of pausing in this song where all of a sudden the music abruptly stops and there's just singing by itself, and then the band in unison comes back together and hits a note. I think the drums just really provide a lot of dynamic to the song and helping keep up the pace and slow it down where it's appropriate, so that certain words are really emphasized, especially towards the end of the song. So yeah, it's a great song rhythmically, and every individual member of the band is doing a lot. Not to critique it, but it's a relatively simple song.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that they play it, again, back to Chris and the way he's playing these chords high up on the guitar, it's just everyone is doing a very intricate thing to make a really kind of simple sounding song sound very complex and probably very difficult for bands to cover and sort of recreate without it, sounding like the real thing.
I love that you brought up that bass tone as well, because I've been bashing my head against the wall trying to figure out what the bass tone on this record reminds me of, and I figured it out. And I'm glad that you brought up NoFX, because this bass tone reminds me so much of the bass tone on So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes. All you got to do is listen to Kids at the K-Hole, and it reminds me so much of that. So I think there's probably a little bit of Fat Mike influence on that bass tone as well.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite lines in the vocals from this particular song?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, oh man. I don't want to just like jump to it because it doesn't seem right. But when I look at the song, I sort of see it in three different parts. And so like the last part of the song is where he says, I recognize the irony that the very system I oppose affords me the luxury of biting the hand that feeds. And from that going into, but that's exactly why privileged fucks like me should
Yeah.
feel obliged to whine and kick and scream until everyone has everything they need. It's just the way that these words flow together is just brilliant. You know, the syncopation of it, but it's the message of what's being said in that song. And I think, you know, to be honest, like when I was first hearing this song, I wasn't thinking about it as closely as I wish I had. You know, I mean, these are things that you just learn as you grow up and mature.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, this is a time where there's a lot of people out in the streets speaking out and maybe using a voice that they've always had but never really utilized in the public sphere. I think all of us, you know, Keith, Greg, and I, you know, we can all think of people in our lives who we may not have known to be very vocally active, who now all of a sudden very much are, and they're using their voice to be a conduit to express certain opinions of people who are marginalized or disenfranchised, aren't able to get their voice out. And it's our duty as privileged folk, you know, to get out there and to whine and kick and scream. I mean, that's probably my favorite phrasing in the song lyrically. But God, I love the Jesus saves, Gretzky scores. It's so. I laugh when I think of that line, and I've been like talking about this particular line with friends of mine in just the past few days, and everyone agrees it's a great line. But to me, it's just this comical. This juxtaposition of Jesus and Wayne Gretzky, you know, and I can't help but think of Jesus dressed up as a goalie.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I'm sure that's not what they really are intending for the imagery for this part, but man, you know, something that needs to be said about this song is that it is just pumped up, politically charged lyrics, and it's all fused with these Canadian hockey references,
Yeah.
man. And I gotta level with you guys. I am not a hockey guy. It's just like, you know, maybe some really astute propaganda fans would be like, oh, you know, maybe this guy's a hockey guy. You know, of course he's gonna love this song. I mean, Steve Smith and you know, the Oilers and all that stuff. But it's like, no, I mean, this is stuff that I had to sort of do my homework on and learn about. But yeah, Jesus saves, Gretzky scores is probably, you know, one of my favorite lines. Man, they're all over this song. The song is riddled with great lines.
That might be the funniest propaganda line of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's not the funniest, it's one of the funniest. And
yeah,
I just love it. Like, I love that line so much that my old job, I used to work at this place called the Blue Note in Columbia, Missouri, which has concerts. And I think you saw Weezer there one time back in the day. So I used to work there, and there's this board above the bar. And if anybody ever goes to Columbia, Missouri and sees a concert at the Blue Note, you can look up above the bar, and every former employee has signed the wall when they've quit. So on their last day, you get fed a bunch of beers and you sign your name on the board above the bar. And if you go there today and you go to the stage left side of the bar and you go all the way to the end and you look straight up, you can see Jesus Saves, Gretzky Scores, written by me in 2006 on the wall. So like when I quit my job at the Blue Note and I signed off for the last time ever, I wrote Jesus Saves, Gretzky Scores up on the wall, and it's still there. Whenever some of my friends back in Missouri go to there, they shoot me a text with a picture of it, and it's still lives. So I'm glad that you love that line as much as I do, because it is so fantastic.
Well, you're a hockey guy to a certain degree, right?
A little bit, yeah. And you know what's really funny is that now I live in Buffalo, and Steve Smith is one of the assistant coaches for the Buffalo Sabres right this second.
What are the chances that this podcast is going to have just a little bit of a Steve Smith like interview?
It does not have a Steve Smith interview.
No, not this particular podcast, but like, you know, maybe at a later date, you guys could get Steve to come on and just
Well, funny story. I know somebody who works for the Sabres. They live down the street from me,
Right.
and
Wheels are in motion.
maybe I'll see if I can get Steve Smith's take on this song.
You guys just need even if it's just a little blurb.
Dude, it would be
You-
unbelievable.
You owe it to yourselves.
I'm going to inquire. So if this episode is released and it has a Steve Smith blurb in it, Josh, that will be because of you, because I literally had not thought of that. But as far as I know, Steve Smith lives here in Buffalo.
Okay.
So we're on to something here.
Okay.
Well, Josh, do you have anything else you'd like to say about this song or what this band means to you or anything like that that springs to mind in our closing moments here together?
Oh man. This is one of the most important bands that the world has today, and I honestly, I don't always understand everything that they're trying to say. There's a lot of stuff that they're singing about that I have to ask friends like, wait, what are they talking about? Like,
Yeah,
what is
for real.
that? And I've had so much fun in the past diving into some of these songs and trying to break them down with people like you, friends of mine who teach U.S. history, friends of mine who've always had interest in politics, religion. I mean, it's just, this is a band that's always been standing up on behalf of others. They're one of the first bands to like put on their album covers and within the liner notes some like very controversial subjects, not for bringing certain things to attention that sort of within like the punk rock culture, skate punk at the time wasn't really wrapping its arms around.
Definitely.
Definitely sort of minor subsets of people within that scene who were maybe not so comfortable with coming out, as a matter of speaking, like as far as their views on feminism or gay rights, animal rights. This is a band that has just always given people the opportunity to sort of stand up to racist, sexist, homophobic people, even within our own scene. So they're just such an important band, and I really hope that they keep doing what they're doing. I'm really happy that Sue Lin is in the band, and Victory Lap is a great record, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Nice. Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking some time to come on and geek out about a great band and a great song, and also helping us walk through that musical thinking as well about how this song flows on guitar and bass, and kind of breaking that down, because hearing from musicians in this interview portion of the show is always just such a pleasure for me, because it helps me understand and push my own understanding of music, and helps me understand the sounds that I'm hearing, and then I'm also then able to articulate why I like what I like, instead of just being like, wow, that's just such an awesome song, man. So you really help me push my own musical understanding as well. So I appreciate your time and your willingness to come hang out with us tonight.
Thank you. I feel very honored that you even asked me to be on. I know you guys have a lot of big names coming up, and I appreciate you bringing in the little guy right here, and I think it is important for you guys just to find people who have, something to say. It doesn't necessarily have to be a celebrity or somebody who's well known, but, because this band just, a lot of people have a lot of love and pride in this band. So I think the right to talk a little bit about it.
Okay, and we're back. So, Keith, what did you like about that conversation that I had with my buddy Josh?
A few things that really stand out. First is just that 9/11 story. How surreal and unusual to be slated to open for a band that has shaped you, in your worldview, but also in your musicianship, and this national tragedy take place in which that's kind of lost. That's such a unusual, surreal story. And I think he also, as a musician, said something that really makes sense, referring to Resisting Tyrannical Government as folksy.
Mm.
I kept coming across acoustic covers of this song on YouTube, and I didn't really get why. Like, why is everyone recording this, solo? But that really makes sense after he described there being different layers to this, to where you can play it as complicated and as intricately as the song is recorded, or you could strip it down to the bare bones and just have a little sing along. And that's a pretty great observation. And I also think toward the end, when Josh said that he keeps coming back to the band and learning and discovering new things, I think that resonates because there are so many Easter eggs musically, lyrically, and in the liner notes and in the art itself, that the more you learn about the world, the more you understand those records. And maybe even like the more you understand the records, then you start to make connections elsewhere. And there's like this, and I think that's just a great way to describe how layered and complex their music and message is.
Awesome. Yeah. I liked that as well. Whenever I was going through YouTube and finding acoustic covers, like that Mikey Erg video that I discussed. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I ended up watching that.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. And this is such an interesting song because you look up the tablature and it's so easy looking to play on the tablature, but then you watch a video of Chris playing it and he's clearly not playing what the tablature has documented.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
right, yeah.
There is like a world within this song of playing it in multiple ways. And one is significantly deeper and more challenging as a player. And you watch Chris do it in the mid 90s and he's just nailing it, So, Keith, tell me, let's dive into this song here a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your lyrical take on this song, because this is some heavy stuff. And we got another like 2-minute song here with so many ideas all packed in.
So in a live video I found online, Chris says before the song begins, this song is about killing elected officials as a viable option for social change. It's also a critical analysis of it. So that first line, why don't we all strap bombs to our chest and ride our bikes to the next G7 picnic? It's almost like an absurd image that I see, almost endearing, of a group of punks going full-on kamikaze on the leaders of the world's economic superpowers. It reminds me of Cop Just Out of Frame and Adventures in Zoocosis, this level of self-sacrifice that maybe isn't taking itself too seriously.
Yeah. And I was doing a little bit of research on the G7 as well. And, I watched that same live version that you mentioned. So I've heard that exact quote just earlier today. And that video was actually filmed in Kansas City. So that was the only live video that came up. And it doesn't really seem like they play that song all that much. Otherwise, I feel like so many other live videos would have come up. But it does feature John playing bass in that video, which is pretty cool to see. But a little bit of background information for any listeners who aren't aware, the G7 started off as the G6, is an international group of leaders who get together to talk about political issues. And so the G6 started off and then added Canada to become the G7, which then added Russia to become the G8. And then Russia annexed and invaded Crimea a few years back. So then they got kicked out and it went back to being the G7. But this is a group of the most powerful world leaders. And the idea of like this group of anarchist punk rockers going and like blowing themselves up in public and like killing a bunch of world leaders in the process in this opening line of this song is quite a thought. If the world order becomes so obsessed with like power and economic interests over the lives of human beings, like this line of this song shows desperate people who have probably urged action and change for many years, acting out desperately. So this is also like a pre 9/11 imagery. And it seems like sort of like surreal in the ways the world has continued to seemingly get more and more scary with each passing year since this song came out in like 96. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, the G7 current countries are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US. And so if Russia was ever readmitted, it would be the G8 again. But the G20 is where economic plans are discussed with like a lot of other nations, but the G7 is the world leaders describing these ideas. So the G7 has all these political leaders all in one spot, which makes that opening line of this song so unbelievably graphic.
Yeah, and I think I never really thought about the next idea. I don't want to catalyze or synthesize the second final solution. So would this act of admitted terrorism trigger an even worse humanitarian crisis and response from these global superpowers? Would me killing myself and these people make things worse? And that level of self-reflection, even if it's totally hypothetical, I really find to be interesting. And then this then ties in with some of the hockey references, which as a as a person who does not like sports at all, I definitely had to look up, and I know you found a couple things about it as well. Tell us about the hockey here.
All right. Well, so the song, the line that you're referring to in the song says, "I don't want to be the Steve Smith of the revolution. Did you see the analogy where the Oilers, the world, bank the Flames? 2 minutes remain in the seventh game of the best of 7 series." So, Steve Smith is a Glaswegian defenseman who played in the NHL for a long time. And he played in his for several years on the Edmonton Oilers hockey team in their 1980s heyday when Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier were crushing the league and winning Stanley Cups left and right. And so in 1986, Steve Smith had what is known as hockey's Bill Buckner moment. And if anybody's a baseball fan, you'll know that Bill Buckner is the player from the Boston Red Sox who the ball went between his legs in the middle of a game. So Steve Smith was a defenseman for the Edmonton Oilers in the conference finals before the Stanley Cup finals. And the game was tied against the Calgary Flames. And with 15 minutes to go in the game, he shot the puck out from behind his net. It deflected off of goaltender Grant Fuhr's leg and bounced into his own net. So Steve Smith scored on himself and lost the series in Game 7 before the Stanley Cup for the Edmonton Oilers. And that's pretty interesting that he scored on himself. So what do you make of this analogy in this song?
Yeah, so I guess my take is that I don't want to make a mistake young, if just like it's his rookie year, and do something that ultimately ends up being like a self-own.
Yeah.
And out of my inexperience or lack of knowledge or ignorance or over enthusiasm to ultimately commit some act, or whether it's as the hypothetical bombing of the G7 or something else, to where I'm going to worsen the lives of people that I'm trying to defend or protect or speak out for, while myself won't really be impacted, because I live in a perhaps like a privileged life, or I live a comfortable existence where I don't have to worry or experience those things.
Yeah. And to me, Chris is asking, what if the death of all of these powerful world leaders at the G7, who, if you think about global politics, I mean, presidents of countries have very specific agendas. Not every American's need is at the top of a president's agenda. I mean, that's just the plain truth. If you think about any person in the world, and you go up to them and say, do you think that your federal government truly believes in your best interests? And I would imagine that the range of responses that you would get are vast. So,
right.
Would anybody's lives truly get better if this, this G7 wipeout were to occur? Clearly the families of the deceased and the deceased themselves, their lives would not get better. But would it make life better for literally anyone else on planet Earth? Or would governments just be completely emboldened to make life even harder
Yeah.
and become nations of law and order
Right.
because all their leaders got wiped out by a bunch of anarchists on bicycles? And then all the ordinary people's lives in countries around the world get harder because they get cracked down on. And what if the people who replace the likes of the deceased in leadership are even worse? So that to me is the one of the dangers of replacing political leadership is like, what if the next person is like just so much worse?
Yeah, this idea of vengeance, which we seem to have talked about quite a bit already in their lyrics, comes up again. And because of the hockey references,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes it witty and pretty funny, but there's a very serious thought and conversation taking place in this song that's almost masked as being not as smart as it actually is.
Yeah. Um, yeah, this is a really interesting song. And whenever I asked Josh during his interview earlier, I asked him about his favorite lyric, and the closing line, which I know that also mentioned, is that it's just perfectly done. And so Chris says, he's a very lucky person. He's lived a very comfortable existence. I recognize the irony that the very system I oppose, which is the world order of global capitalism and things like that, affords me the luxury of biting the hand that feeds. So even though he has everything that he could ever want and is extremely fortunate and economically stable within his life, and he's a member of a demographic in the world who is not viewed upon with suspicion.
Mhm.
He sort of like almost like is walking through the world with a free pass. And so he's
Yeah.
using the system that allows him to say whatever he wants to be like a conduit for people who don't have those same privileges afforded to them. And I got to tell you, man, whenever I heard this song for the first time in like, I don't know, 1998 or 1999 or whatever, I didn't know what privilege meant.
Yeah,
I
for
heard the
sure.
song, I was like, oh, it was a rocking song, man. But I was like 14. And so now, like, so many things in the world come into play. And I just keep seeing so many times about how ahead of their time this band was. I mean, it cannot be easy to write a song in the mid 90s that still has a lot to teach in 2020.
Yeah, the empathy and self-awareness, but also self-deprecation is so evident for a group of 20-year-olds. They really make fun of themselves for writing some either immature or not very profound songs in the early part of the discography. But I think this one ages pretty well. And, I've mentioned that I don't really like or love How to Clean Everything and Less Talk, but there are a lot of parts on this album specifically that I really enjoy, even if like the whole isn't necessarily a favorite. So revisiting this song, I think I've kind of found a few things that I appreciate more. And I also have to admit that I struggle with the reality that 14 or 15-year-old Keith probably wouldn't have been too open to a lot of these ideas. I probably would have been on the defensive, resistant to, these open attacks on racism and capitalism and homophobia. My worldview was pretty small, and I spent more time forming opinions and parroting belief systems than really reading, learning, questioning, and challenging things. So it's probably best that I found this album a little bit later when my worldview had kind of expanded a bit, because I might have like reshelved this if I picked it up at a record store, in my youth.
Yeah, well, and speaking of the record, this is a really interesting piece of work too. So I have the LP here, and if you have this record on LP, they want to get these ideas in front of your eyeballs, even if you don't buy the album. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like a kid that goes into a record store today and goes in the punk section and finds a copy of Less Talk More Rock on vinyl can pick it up and they can literally read the entire album without spending a dime. All of these ideas are written on the back cover. of the LP itself. So like you can spend, 15 minutes in a record store holding this LP wrapped in shrink wrap and read every single word on the whole entire record, which I think is pretty amazing.
It's like open access punk.
Absolutely. JSTOR, remember that nonsense?
Yeah. Right.
So, this is a really interesting record, and it's a really interesting song. And I know that Mike and Josh both had the same favorite lines. What do you make of the closing of the song?
Yeah, the lyric at the end, I think, is probably one of the smartest and most poignant lyrics in all of punkdom. Where he says, the privileged fucks like me, and the live videos I saw, he says, and all of you.
Yes, I love that.
And I think that's probably, that makes it so much better. Obviously a different version playing it live, but reminding the audience, like, look, it's not just me singing about things, but if you've had the opportunity to pay $10 to come to a punk show and maybe spend some money on beer and some merchandise, you're almost certainly better off than most of the other people on earth, which means that you should probably spend some time thinking about them as well. And as we said, as teachers, right, as educators who try to build empathy and critical thinking and, expand students, their worldview as much as possible. That lyric really does it for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so let's, just for fun, go back to our Steve Smith example. So like I was digging around on Steve Smith because, I felt terrible for this guy because he had this like humiliating career moment, like in his rookie year, at such an interesting moment. And so if anybody out there who's a fan of this band kind of feels bad for Steve Smith for the self-own of scoring on his own team. So here's a little bit of how that rest of that year played out. So the Flames went on to lose to the Montreal Canadiens, known as the Habs, in the 86 Cup Finals. However, with Steve Smith on the roster, the Oilers went on to win it again in 87 and 88, and I think 90 as well. But Wayne Gretzky left the team in 88, but Steve Smith did win 3 Stanley Cups with the Edmonton Oilers. And funny story, Steve Smith now works for the Buffalo Sabres, which is where I live. So Steve Smith, if you're out there, we're thinking about you.
Yeah, don't feel too bad for him, I guess.
No. All right, so Keith, tell me a little bit about what you like about the musicianship of this song.
This has to be one of the very few tracks where like the music and the vocals kick in like right away, pretty much in sync right at the beginning, and I really dig that.
I like that too.
Yeah, the guitar is really high and it has like this ringing, resonating sound. That main riff, while not really hummable, I don't think I could sing that or hum it. I think it's really unique. I also really like the riff that plays right after the "Play the Man, Not the Punk." That kind of bridges the two parts of the song together.
Is that the part that goes
simple?
Yeah.
It's simple. It's it's catchy. It's a fun punk melody, and it seems to be played a little bit slower than maybe like a fast-paced, super high octane punk band in the mid '90s. And because of that, it makes it a little bit more memorable. The bass here is super distinct. It sounds obviously a lot different from Todd's style and tone that's going to develop over time, but it really fits this record. And I don't always love the earlier vocals, but here the backing vocals really work. And from the videos I saw online, it seems like Jord was doing those live.
Nice. Which is interesting because, you think of John K. Sampson, who sings multiple Propaganda songs, but Jord's the one back there backing up Chris. Because I couldn't see if John was singing on the track or not because he was out of the camera frame a lot of the time, but it seems like he wasn't.
Yeah. You can see a mic and Jord's kind of playing away and singing along.
Yeah, and I thought that Josh did a really nice job of explaining the guitar on this song, and it's so interesting to watch Chris play it. And I
Mhm.
completely was latched on to what Josh was saying when he was describing how it's played up very high and how there's lots of stretchy chords that are like an exercise, a workout, if you will, for the hands for any kind of guitar player. Because I found basic tablature that was just basic power chords, and we've mentioned that Mikey Erg performance a couple times, which you can find if you just want to see it performed slowly with power chords. That was really great. But the drums on this album and on this song sound fantastic. I think that Ryan Green's records in the 90s have like a very distinct kick drum sound that was super important to me because, I played drums and I played in super fast punk bands, and I was always obsessed with that super fast single kick double time drum beat, and so having a very, very pronounced kick drum on these mid 90s records was absolutely one of the most crucial things that could have happened in my musical development as a drummer back in the 90s. And if you listen to this song, you hear that super pronounced kick drum. If you listen to the song On the Outside by No Use for a Name off the album Making Friends, that's another really amazing example of a kick drum sound that really spoke to me when I was a kid. And I heard through the grapevine that the way that Ryan Green got these really pronounced kick drum sounds in the 90s is that he would like duct tape a silver dollar to the bass drum head, and when the bass drum beater on the kick pedal hit that silver dollar, it like gave it this metallic clang that was a really pronounced sound. So if you ever hear something that sounds like, No Use for a Name, Making Friends, or Propaganda, Less Talk, More Rock, I'm told that there's probably a silver dollar duct taped to the drum head, which I think is pretty funny.
Silver dollar drums, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So I know you did a bunch of research on some additional things here. Go ahead and give us some of your major teachable moments here, Mr. Goff.
So I can't help but think about this song just in our current context. And there was a recent editorial in the Washington Post by the writer Trey Johnson. It was called "When Black People Are in Pain, White People Just Join Book Clubs."
Oh man.
And this article really had me reflecting and assessing, my own actions, ideas, and words during this really, really pivotal time that feels so different from anything else I've ever experienced. And there's a part where he writes, quote, "This isn't the time to circle up with other white people and discuss Black pain in the abstract. It's the time to acknowledge and examine the pain they've personally caused. Black people live and die every day under the burdens of racism more insidious than the current virus that's also disproportionately killing us. And yet white people tend to take a slow route to meaningful activism, locked in familiar patterns, seemingly uninterested in really advancing progress." So this article really came to mind when I was thinking about the song and looking at the lyrics, wanting to create change personally, but not wanting to make things worse, right? Like accidentally using the wrong hashtag or saying the wrong thing at a protest, or, not saying something and not giving someone else the mic or the opportunity to speak. And here, in the song, even if it's hypothetical, they have this open and public penchant toward self-critical reflection, in interviews clearly, but also in songs. And my takeaway here is just criticism cannot just be outward. It has to point inward as well. And I probably don't tell myself that enough. I might think I have the right idea and therefore it's fine, but really what are others saying? And that article, I really recommend giving that a read. What about you, Greg? What did you take away from this?
Well, I was thinking a lot about this as well because I saw an interview that Chris did after Victory Lap came out where he sort of like describes what he's trying to do as to be a conduit and to help bring people who have never thought about these ideas to the conversation, but also helping them, like helping the new learner launch into other resources that might deepen their own understanding. And I think in the interview, Chris said, I'm kind of sick of hearing the white male voice, mine included. And, I fully recognize that you and I are sitting here as two white males talking about these songs that we love. And Chris said that he hopes that what he's doing now is being a conduit to help people find other people who are doing really amazing work too.
Yeah.
And I've been finding tons of fantastic stuff lately. Like I'm currently reading Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi. I found a few new authors. Like right now I'm reading Nnedi Okorafor's Who Fears Death. I'm trying to find more voices myself. So I think that that's kind of what sticks with me in this global moment is just continuing to try to push myself, but also trying to figure out what I can do that's actually useful and not Steve Smith scoring on his own goal.
Yeah, it's not easy. I've been stressing about it. I agree.
Yeah. Did you find any good YouTube comments about this song?
Yeah, I saw one that said, "This song never fails to make me sing, cry, or get goosebumps. If only more of us knew the terrors that exist and lie ahead."
Ooh.
Yeah, which is prescient and ominous. And maybe if you saw it at the time, you'd think hyperbolic. But that person kind of nailed it.
What would you rate this song in the grand scheme of Propagandy's discography?
I'm going to give it a solid 3.0. It's a solid 3. This is probably one of my favorite tracks on Let's Talk. I like that the lyrics embody, again, a sort of uncertainty and self-criticism. Sonically, it's a bit unorthodox while still being catchy and, fun sing-along parts. And it's has one of the best lyrics in all of punkdom. So, yeah, solid 3. What do you think?
Well, Josh really he really frustrates me here because he made such a compelling point for why this song is so much more than meets the eye musically. Because I was going to give it a 3 because I love the words. It makes me think. I would love to see it live. But the music on its head sounds so straightforward compared to what I know Propagandy can musically pull off. And, the melody is fantastic all the way through. I love the drum sound, the bass tone. So I was going to give it a 3, but now I'm going to give it a 3.25.
Oh, we got a new score scale here. I didn't realize a quarter point was possible.
I apologize for changing the rules in the moment, but
I'll allow
Josh's description of the artfulness of the guitar really got me thinking.
Yeah, I think his description was pretty great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandy. This has been our discussion on the song Resisting Tyrannical Government from Let's Talk More Rock. If you want to follow us, you can find us on Twitter at PropagandyPod. You can find us on Instagram at PropagandyPod. And you can also support the show by subscribing and rating in iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get podcasts. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. See ya. Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandy, is created, hosted, and produced by Keith Goff and Greg Soden. Musical clips on this show are composed and performed by Propagandy. Artwork on the show is by Justin Santora, who can be reached at justinsantora.com. You can find us on Twitter at PropagandyPod and on Instagram at PropagandyPod. If you like the show, please drop a rating on your podcast app of choice and subscribe to receive future episodes. Tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening.